Once again, thank you all so much. A heartfelt thanks to you all for being here at the V&A's Tay Late because we must. We are really excited to celebrate the rebellious energy of groundbreaking Scottish dancer and choreographer Michael Clark. My name is Caroline Grewar. I'm one of the curators here at the museum, and I worked with colleagues from Barbican to bring this exhibition to V&A Dundee. And at the museum, we really just want everyone to know who Michael Clark is and to immerse themselves in his joyous and creative world that is bringing, perhaps most crucially, with collaboration. And there is no one better to have delivered this event tonight than Charles Jeffrey, my colleague Nichol Keene, who has worked hand in hand with Charles to co-curate this incredible evening, describes Charles as a radical creative who thrives in the colourful tension between control and chaos. And for me, that resonates so powerfully with the work of Michael Clark, who was a precise master of his craft and who subverted all notions of classical and traditional ballet to introduce themes about which he was passionate: fashion, queer culture, set design, graphic design. The list really does go on and on. I'll introduce Charles in a moment. We're all very eager to hear him in conversation with Miss Cabbage, but Miss Cabbage, we are really delighted to have you here this evening, so thank you for joining us. Miss Cabbage is a multidisciplinary artist and DJ who graduated locally from DJ CAD in 2020. She is reclaiming her queer identity by creating a body of work and sound that is directly addressing pressing matters of both physical and spiritual. Miss Cabbage rebels against heteronormative cultures that exist throughout society. Again, something that we see again and again throughout Michael Clark's work. And while the main themes throughout Miss Cabbage's practice are predominantly around experimentation and freedom of expression, there is a depiction between human and non-human identities that relate to her own lived experiences as a queer, fat, non-conforming transgender woman. Thank you so much for being here this evening. Charles almost needs no introduction, but I will. He is from Glasgow, studied at Central St Martin's in London. Charles runs internationally renowned fashion label Loverboy and a cult club night, which were both founded in 2014. The Loverboy night forms the primary research for Charles's fashion collections with his tribe of friends and creative collaborators, artists, performers, musicians, drag queens, and poets contributing to the egalitarian spirit of his brand. He has been honoured with a number of industry accolades, the winner of 2 Scottish Fashion Awards, the first in 2016 as Graduate of the Year and later as Young Designer of the Year in 2017. 2017, Charles also received the British Fashion Award for Best Emerging Menswear Designer, and in 2018, he won the British GQ Award for Emerging Designer. Phew, that's a lot. Let's get going. Yeah. Charles, before I crack on, I just want to say a really heartfelt thanks to you for being here tonight and for your enormous contribution to this event. So now we have just under 30 minutes to hear Charles and Miss Cabbage speak, formalities out of the way. And I want to kick things off very simply by asking, what do you love about Michael Clark? What is it about his work that speaks to you and your own respective practices? Over to you.
Well, I mean, I want to say thank you to everybody who's made it here tonight. It's such an honour to be here in Dundee and such an amazing institution. I think it's so amazing that this exists first and foremost, and that we're able to celebrate such an amazing Scottish talent like Michael Clark, who has inspired me since I was a student in St Martin's. I first came across his work through just a kind of tip-off from a friend of mine. And I remember the first thing that I saw that really made me kind of resonate with him was his fashion sense. Like, I think, the way that he puts things together, not only in his shows in collaboration with people like Lee Bowery, but also on himself as well. I mean, he's such a striking individual from a menswear perspective, also from a women's wear perspective. I mean, he's just got such an amazing way of working with his body, and the way that he has curated lots of different designers' works on his body, and his team as well, I think is just like beyond inspiring. So yeah, it was a real honour to be able to respond to his work today. So yeah.
And what about you, Miss Cabbage?
I think for me, the favourite things about the work is that it's very, you know, it's in your face, it's loud, and it's also very, I think it's just overwhelming, but it's, you know, positively overwhelming. I think so often as queer people, we're taught to, maybe not taught to, but society possibly expects us to hide and be, you know, shunned into a corner, whereas the exhibition really shows that that is not the case and we're allowed to take up the space. And I think for me, looking at the work, that is just really exciting to see that, and especially in somewhere like Dundee, it's really important for, you know, queer people in Dundee to see that as well. But I think overall, it's just the overall loudness of the work is definitely my favorite thing.
It's unapologetic.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that both of our work kind of is, you know, in a sense. I think when I first started doing Loverboy, it was a club night, and it was just a great place for like people that are basically here today just to kind of gather together and sort of validate each other and sort of kind of grow from that. And I think the thing that sort of kind of influenced my work even more from Michael Clark's work was I just saw so many synergies in what we were doing and realized that it's not just something that happens because, you know, we're in the same space and it's a queer sort of space. It's also to do with the things that are going on in the world. You know, the things that are happening in the government then are kind of similar to what's happening now. And I think, you know, rebellious creative spirit always sort of kind of, it's great fertilizer for that. People kind of come together to sort of, you know, share ideas and sort of validate each other in spaces that are created by sort of disparities in government.
We talk so much about that here, you know, that Michael's work, the majority of Michael's work that you're seeing in the exhibition was delivered in the 80s and 90s, you know, some of it almost 40 years ago. And the fact that it still really resonates with what we're talking about today.
Super timeless visually, yeah.
And you feel positive about that in some ways, you know, it's got, there's different ways of thinking about that, I suppose.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think for me, the fact that it's so timeless is because, you know, it deals with the same sort of issues which are timeless. I mean, we might sometimes feel that we're going through a sort of safe spell when we're in our kind of like safe spaces, especially as queer people. You know, the LGBT community is constantly in attack, you know, and it's something that we have to be reminded by. And I think that's why queer work is so sort of bold and unapologetic. And I think to some people who have maybe never kind of encountered Michael's work before, or Lee's work, or Trojan's work, or the many different collaborators that Michael has worked with over the years, and sort of thinks, oh my God, this is like quite crude or rude, or it sort of is coming across in a way that makes me feel something. I mean, that's the whole point. I mean, you know, as queer people, we are kind of backed into a corner and expected to sort of deal with that. You know, we're kind of met with a lot of shame by the majority. And I think that's why we are so kind of like aggressively forward with our, you know, with who we are as our identity. And I think there's something really timeless about that. It's like the kind of like punk look almost feels quite timeless, even though some people might think, oh, it's like this kind of thing. You know, it's always been regurgitated within popular culture. And, you know, there's something really interesting about how when you see it, you sort of curated in this way in all of the different rooms, there's something, I mean, if it wasn't for the VHS camera, you could say that somebody is doing that right now and it would feel like very kind of appropriate. So.
Mm-hmm. I definitely think as well with the work, there's a lot of familiarity, but not maybe even only for queer people, that everyone from different walks of life, there is familiarity in the work. And I think that is, you know, extends itself of the work being timeless. There's people that can relate to it in so many different ways. And whatever kind of, you know, if you look at, for example, family members who aren't queer, they can relate to that because they've had a queer kid. And I think that's also really important because it's bringing everyone together as a collective community. And especially like in an art exhibition, it's so powerful. So it's really great to have it.
Even with the objects that Michael uses as set design, whether he's collaborating with Sarah Lucas or kind of curating it himself, I mean, I think that was a thing, you know, even in the posters, you see, you know, the references to Celtic, or you see the references to like baked beans and these kind of objects. I think it's this idea of sort of like rendering them in a whole other format. I mean, that's inherently queer when you take something and you sort of reclaim it with like scale or materiality, or even just kind of like placement. I mean, what's more camp and queer than a huge big tin of baked beans? You know, it's like there's something just so innate about that. And I think that's it's also super Scottish as well. You know, the idea of the kind of identity, not only just in the kilt, but like I think I look at it and I look at some of the dances and I can see like my aunties and my uncles and my grannies. Do you know what I mean? Like there's something in the way that he curates, you know, the people that he's working with, even in the movements themselves, you know, you can see a lot of Scottishness in that.
Yeah. And I want to talk about the Scottishness a little bit. I think for a lot of us, there's a lot of nostalgia in the exhibition as well. Some of the footage from the 80s and 90s outside fringe events and culture show that was on a Sunday afternoon. It really kind of is emotional for many people who've been watching, who've been visiting the exhibition. But going back to the Scottishness, like Michael, both of you are from Scotland and you've both lived and worked in different places as queer creatives in Scotland and beyond in other places as well. We'd love to hear a little bit more about your personal journeys as contemporary Scottish queer creatives. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So for me, I am from the Highlands. I come from a little town called Tain. I don't know if anyone knows. Woo! And my kind of experience as a creative, I started like a HNC at Inverness College, and that was kind of my gateway into creativeness in itself, but also kind of being from the Highlands. And is that working? Yeah. Okay. Being from the Highlands and having that experience of I often feel like going back to the Highlands, it's a way in like a little time portal. A lot of things there are still, I guess, behind the time in a sense. So growing up there and being very overtly queer, that was dealing with that in itself, but trying to kind of form my creativeness. And I guess the experience of people in the Highlands that formed a lot of my work itself, and the reaction that I would get from people, whether that be, positive or negative, that experience of being in the Highlands. And I guess I almost felt isolated in that. So that led me to want to branch out and move somewhere else. And I decided to come to Dundee. And that was 4 years at the art school. I studied fine art. So I think that was my, as I say, gateway to get out the Highlands. I always felt like I guess I needed to get out. I needed to escape. And I was like, how can I do that without, I need to hatch a little plan here to get out. So being able to come to Dundee and be met with very, like-minded people and be in a city that kind of champions creativeness was really crucial to my understanding of what queerness actually was. When I kind of arrived, I was making a lot of work in response to, I guess like the female figure. And I didn't maybe realize that was possibly a subconsciousness to me realizing that I was transgender. So I think being able to come away from a very small place and to a bigger place, that was really, I guess, my point of where I realized, okay, there's something I need to tap into here. So with the creative journey from there, I kind of stayed in Dundee, and I guess the queer scene in Dundee, there is a smaller scene than Glasgow per se, but I think the queers that are in Dundee, a lot of them are very loud and proud to be here. Because I think as well, a lot of people that I'd met kind of had the same experience as me, coming from a really small town, whether it be the Highlands or somewhere else, and all coming together in the art school to kind of, I guess, bounce ideas off each other was, when I started to look at what messages I wanted coming to work. And a lot of the work that I made was really, neon colors, giant paintings about eggs, like that kind of thing, like you were saying.
Very appropriate.
Yeah. Very on theme, thank you.
So I think that was, being able to make that work also allowed me to get a lot of, I guess, the trauma that I had experienced from being from the Highlands out in that work. And it was really therapeutic in a way. And that was, I guess, when I finished the degree, I'd kind of fully come out as a trans woman. But again, my creative practice really, really informed my realization of that, because I was able to just make whatever I wanted: beans, eggs, everything else. And then I moved to Glasgow. And from Glasgow, I started doing sound work, DJing, a lot more kind of, I guess, fluidity. And that's something that's in the exhibition as well. I feel the exhibition itself is super fluid. And that is, I guess, as queer people, you're maybe taught that, not taught, but I keep saying taught, more like press
subjected to.
Yeah. That it needs to be like linear, but actually being queer is not. It's super fluid, and you can go anywhere on the scale. It's not a straight line. It's more like a wiggly squiggle or something.
Or a fried egg.
Or a fried egg, or some beans. And I think that is, kind of coming to Glasgow from Dundee. When I come back to Dundee, I'm able to bring what I've learned in Glasgow back
with you. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of overall the experience for me, I think.
I like the description of there being fluidity within the exhibition. It's interesting. Charles?
So for me, I mean, when I moved to London to study at Central St Martin's, I was experimenting a lot with lots of different kind of projects and sort of identities. And it was when it came to my sort of final major project that I actually did look at a lot of my sort of Scottish culture. And I did a project on the Highland clearances and Neds, and I did a kind of like collage based on that. But then when it came to doing my own label, after we sort of experimented with all of the sort of visuals from the club night and that kind of queer identity, I wanted to tap back into my Scottish culture again. So we started working with tartan fabrics, we started working with tweeds, and people really loved it, and we started making a lot of kind of sales off of the pieces, because I don't think people had really kind of seen that from a younger designer before, and from my generation anyway. And then it was only when I actually decided to go up to Scotland to do a research trip back in 2019, I decided to look into this festival in Orkney called the Festival of the Horse, which is a festival that's been going for 200 years. And it's basically like this little kind of like pageant where children wear these outfits that look like dressage horses. Now, it sounds kind of weird, but it's actually one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And you should definitely look it up if you don't know of it, because not many people know of it, actually. And when you look at it, it almost looks like Norwegian costume or even African costume, but it's actually Scottish. It's just like wee families kind of decorating their children in kind of like postage stamps or kind of like adornments that they kind of have from their house. Some people who worked in like post offices would have stamps. Some people that worked in like cake factories or sort of cake shops would kind of decorate their kids with like little kind of accoutrements from their shop. And, for me, that was such amazing research to take into things like tailoring or embroidery or even print. And then we decided to extend our trip from Orkney, and we went to the Mitchell Library in Glasgow and looked at a lot of kind of Scottish culture. I mean, my grandfather's family were obviously in the shipbuilders. They were part of the shipbuilding kind of culture within the Clyde. My cousin Alexander Miller is a painter. He paints a lot of the kind of backs of the male figures that are kind of going off into the Clyde. It's a famous painter from that. So we kind of wanted to look into that a little bit. And then we went to the Glasgow School of Art archive as well and looked at like outfits from like Billy Connolly. We looked at the big banana shoes in the People's Palace, and just gathered and gathered and gathered. And then I came up with this show called Hell Menju, which came out just before the pandemic. And we decided to just basically render a whole new sect of people. Oh, and we also looked at John Byrne, who I'm sure a few of you know is in the exhibition. And the thing that I love about kind of tapping into Scottish culture is it's mine, and I think that that's the thing which is sort of separating a lot of other people from people who are just kind of copying Balenciaga or like or like Givenchy or trying to just like look like Kim Kardashian. It's like, no, there's such a wealth of like culture up here that I can like leverage to create, innovative new designs. And it's just scratching the surface. I mean, I just had a glance, was able to have, well, not just a glance, I was like very kindly introduced to the permanent collection here for a period of time, but I could stay in there for hours. I mean, just like one item could inform a whole collection. And I don't know, I just think this is such an important, it's so important that this museum is here and just constantly reflecting back to us what we've created as Scottish people. And I think we're a really proud nation as well. Like, I think that's the thing I love about Scottish people as well. We're just so proud to say that we created something and invented something. And I think that's something that I just want to try and champion. That's my modus operandi now for my brand. Not only do I want to sort of like involve a lot of queerness and question a lot of things like gender identity and inclusivity, but I also want to just tackle and sort of look at all of these different items within Scottish culture and sort of regurgitate it back out. It's so much fun to do so. So
it's something that you're really proud to continue to carry with you.
So proud.
Yeah.
So proud. Honestly.
It's really interesting when you talk, Miss Cabbage, about that moment of breaking away from the Highlands. And it reminds me, there's a very gorgeous piece of footage in the exhibition of Michael's mum talking about when she put him on the train to London when he was really young to start studying ballet, and how he was a bit grumpy and I don't want to go, mum, and it's really moving. But then she said within a matter of weeks, and he found himself in London, he just sort of found, his space and somewhere he could be himself and really thrived. But despite that, it's clear, I think, through his work that he always carried his heritage, and he carries that continuously through with him as he works on and on. I want to move on to talk about you both and each other. I heard recently that you guys, you just met not so long ago, but you're obviously big supporters of each other's work, really interested in respective practices and so on. So can you tell us a little bit about that and what it is that you admire particularly in each other's practice, and what next?
Well, I think I saw you in a photo of like Stevie's or something like that, or Furman's, and I was like, who is this amazing, fabulous person? And then I went on your profile and it was a piece of cabbage. Your name was a piece of cabbage. And I was like, that is the most queerest fucking thing I've ever seen in my life. I'm obsessed with this woman. Who is this? And then I was going on your profile, and then there was like these snippets of you DJing, and it was these like intense, like bombastic performances. And it was you just playing these like really, really hardcore songs and just visually looking so amazing. And I was just like, this is just fucking fantastic. And then I realized you were Scottish as well, and I was like, yes. Like, it was just like, I have to like just meet this person. And then like the whole way through, like I kind of just like brought her up, because obviously I'd normalized it in my mind afterwards. I was like, okay, a piece of cabbage, like, love her. And then I was like, working with Nichol, who by the way sadly can't be here because of COVID, and just another shout out, she did such an amazing job of bringing all of this together. I was speaking to Nichol, and I was saying, okay, there's a couple of people I want to bring here, and I want to work with some casting on it. But I was like, there's one person I really want to work with, and her name is a piece of cabbage, and she's a DJ. And she went, what? A piece of cabbage? I was like, yeah, a piece of cabbage. And I was like, oh wait, the name is quite queer, so that, like, it's fine. But yeah, like ever since then, I think we've chatted a couple of times, and it's just been such an easy thing. I think we understand each other. We come from the same sort of environment. I'm so like grateful to be able to have a lot of my queer family here as well, just kind of performing, and we all validate each other. We might be a very small group of people, but because we have each other, we're able to really grow and sort of succeed in life. And you just need like 2 or 3 people to have you kind of on your team.
Yeah.
And that's why when I'm on nights out, right, like I'm known as like the screamer. Like I'm always like, yes, like I'm always like screaming and like bigging people up, because it's so important. Like when you're in a nightlife setting, or you're in any setting where you're being completely vulnerable, you need to have like aggressive validation, because it makes you feel good when you're doing it, and people feel good when you're receiving it. So I don't know, this for me is another big validation. I fucking love you, babes. You're absolutely fabulous. Seriously.
Well, the feeling's mutual. I think for me, being aware of Loverboy quite a few years back, I, there's a lot of brands out there that don't include a lot of diversity in what they make and what they put on people's bodies. And I think for me, being able to see a brand that was actively putting clothes on fat queer bodies, for me, that was, take my money. Like, but I think that's so important. And, as a brand, to be aware of that is crucial. So I think seeing that, and then when we kind of started speaking, I remember I was like sitting with my flatmate, and you messaged me, and I was like, Charles Jeffrey just messaged me. That was like a very, I think, like you were saying, to be recognized by each other is it's a very full circle moment. And I think what your work says and what it does for queer people is gonna it leaves a lasting impression, and it gets people thinking, it gets people talking, and I think that's the best thing about it. And because it's on such a, you dress, like I was saying to you about Michael, that you dress for a show, seeing somebody like that, it also gives hope to other people, like, okay, like I can do that, and I think that's something that a lot of other people see in your work as well. So yeah, just obsessed.
I see you obsessed.
I see you just over there.
Mutual respect and lots of aggressive validation. That's ideal.
Totally.
I'm conscious of time, but Miss Cabbage and I had a really nice chat earlier on about what the exhibition sort of reminds you to do. And it's sort of, you talked about it almost as being a prompt, I guess. Sort of something being in the exhibition kind of compels you to keep going, I think was the way you kind of described it. Can you elaborate a little bit? I'd love to hear what you think about that as well, Charles, but
yeah.
Can you elaborate a bit on that? It was really interesting.
So I think for me, seeing the exhibition, I've been, I guess, not the norm for a very long time. And sometimes, you do have those thoughts and you're like, oh, like, do I really want to leave the house and have someone take a photo of me or shout abuse at me? These things happen. It's just the real of it. But it's not that all the experiences are negative. And you meet people and they say, people have said to me, you've helped me realize who I am. And these things, I guess when people say that to me, I obviously listen and I hear it, but sometimes I'm maybe not believing it. And the exhibition today was a really big reminder to, don't keep going, keep doing what you're doing, and
Totally.
you'll help more people. The more out there and the more people that see you, the more people that will be able to, people have said to me about, clothing as well. I'm very passionate about, I think fat people and anyone should wear any clothes that they want to wear, but especially fat people, where there doesn't need to be a formation of what exactly we should wear. We should wear what we want, and I'm very big on that. So people being able to say that I've helped them wear what they want, that was what the exhibition really reminded me of, to just keep, I guess, just like, okay, you got this, you're doing good. And I think that's the same with you as well, and every other queer person that's involved in this. We all have such a distinctive and different vision that helps and informs a lot of other people and how they live their lives.
Totally. I mean, for me, coming to see this exhibition again, I was really lucky enough to see it at the Barbican at the very beginning. And I remember it was just around, I think it was just before it was about to close, before COVID.
Yeah.
And I spent, I think, nearly 4 hours in there. I was just like, I need to take in all of this because I don't know if it's going to be seen again. And I think it just kind of reminded me of a way of working in a process that sometimes can get quite lost when you're sort of building a business. So Loverboy's been going for sort of 6 years now as a clothing business. So in that time, we've sort of grown from just being like 2 or 3 of us in like my bedroom making clothes to having, like 10 people and 2 studios inside Somerset House. So you become quite kind of focused on keeping that business going and thinking about product in a slightly binary way. It's just the nature of the beast, really. You've got to kind of pay your bills, feed your family, what's selling well, what's not selling well, what fabric should we do, how can we make it sustainable? All of these conversations go into the kind of ecosystem of the business. And then when you come and see something like Michael Clark and you see, the amazing costumes by Lee Bowery, and then just all of the different processes of the artists that Michael has collaborated with, you're like, oh my God, there is so many ways in which you can tackle making clothing or pattern cutting something or even performing fashion. And, in a day and age now where, it's just the richer are getting richer and it's just these super brands that are working with celebrities and it's just these high glossy catwalks all of the time. And the bigger designers, even the ones that are really transgressive, like, Rick Owens or Comme des Garçons, they're still on the upper echelon of everything else. And, I'm on this mid-level now where I'm trying to figure out how I can still be innovative and sort of challenge the catwalk, but still make money to feed my family. So I come here and I see these amazing performances that probably at the very beginning didn't cost that much money, but had so much power and impact. So it's just a reminder to just be like, right, always think differently, always queer your approach, and always challenge the status quo, because it's so easy to just fall in and be comfortable. And I think when you start your life as a queer person, you're not comfortable. And so you always have to challenge yourself because, you help people by doing that. You help people, you help validate people. So I don't know. It's just, I think it's such an important exhibition. It's honestly, it says so much. It really does.
And I guess it's sort of confidence building and empowering to sort of just take a step back and be reminded of Michael and his collaborators, and that there's a kind of history and you're the next generation, and that feels good, I can imagine. And there's gorgeous stories within the exhibition of the really raw creativity around fashion. Michael sitting at the side of performances, cutting things up, and with Lee Bowery, it's just, it's that kind of very responsive creativity that's very raw, which I think really kind of resonates with what you were just chatting about there.
Totally. And it's to do with human connection. I mean, the fact is that, Michael is a dancer and has to work with lots of different bodies.
Yes.
And I think what I found so interesting in the exhibition is sort of hearing Lee sort of talk, and he was kind of almost bitching about Michael, like talking about the fact he was like, Michael, you don't need to shout at us in order to get the project to work. And then, it's this kind of like connection. I mean, you're allowed to argue, you're allowed to kind of make mistakes. But the thing that I found so interesting is that, the way that like Lee worked with Michael, he thought about, and Michael, informed the designs as well and was part of the design process. But the kind of interesting graphic nature of Lee's work, how it reads so flat and graphic and sort of these bold colors. Like I think that only really happens when you have that real kind of human connection, like the certain lines that are cut into the garments. You don't really get that now from it. Like a lot of the students I work with now, they're so digital. They're always on their phones. They're always working from computers, and it's like, why don't you just talk to somebody and drop some patterns?
Them and
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's something about that which I find so great.
Yeah. Oh, I'm very conscious of time. I feel like there's many questions, but such a privilege to chat to you both and have you here this evening. But I'm also conscious there's a huge amount of activity going on outside these doors, and lots of stuff happening.
Fun stuff.
Fun
stuff.
stuff.
To feast your eyes
It's
on.
Friday night.
We've even got a bell.
The bell.
We've got a bell to herd you around the room.
Very quickly though, thank you.
Thank you so much.
And enjoy your evening. Thank you so much.
Follow the bell.